Hi, Mac Sheldon here. Welcome to the shop. Today we're just doing a little honeydew project to install some finger pulls on the drawers and doors that we have in our house. And what the instructions say to do is just to locate them wherever you like in the center, and then screw into the back and leave them proud of the top of the drawer. But rather than do it that way, we'd like to inset them. So we'll use the PantoRouter to cut a little rabbet in the front or in the top surface of each of the drawers, and also in the doors. And it's especially important in the doors because the doors have little clearance now, and if we mounted two of these finger pulls facing each other, there would not be enough room for the doors to close. So we'll inset those as well. So since we've got 14 of them to do, I made a jig and I'll show you how we did it. One of my favorite things for the PantoRouter is to make jigs, and today I guess you can call the PantoRouter a jig, and we're going to use the jig with a jig to make a jig. And we wanted to cut some slots in this piece so that we can hold that down to our table. And all this is a front fence stop so that the drawer piece will slide against this and stop. There's a center mark that will locate to the center line on the table, and then there's a spacer here that will allow us to not hit the table with our router bit. So all this will be held proud of the front of the table. So we're installing our vertical clamping jig. And now this piece, we're going to cut our slots in this direction. So we'll just locate our piece on here. We've got a method to clamp it, and we'll go ahead and cut our slots. This is a little unconventional use of the PantoRouter, but we're using our largest guide bearing that we're riding on top of the template holder using these two vertical template holder adapters as stops. And you'll notice that we want to get as much travel this way as possible. So we're letting the 6mm guide bearing be the stop rather than the outside of the guide bearing here. So we get a nice long throw, and we've raised it up as high as we can and still have the template holder engaged in the support piece. This is 1/2-inch plywood, so we'll cut a 1/2-inch dado about 1/4 of an inch deep, and that'll allow the head of the screw to be recessed. So we'll just set our depth stop at 1/4 inch. And now with a 1/4 inch bit, we'll go ahead and make the cut all the way through. I have this set up with two of our vertical template holder adapters with the bar piece from our slot mortise system. And that gives me the ability to travel between the two stops and have the taper on the profile of this bar. So what I'll do is I'll start with my guide bearing at the thickest part. If I need to make my rabbet a little bit larger, I can travel up the taper and make that just a tiny bit wider. So I've got it dialed in where I think it's going to work pretty well. I'm right just shy of the line. Before I make my cut, I need to know how deep to make it. So I'll bump the router bit to the front of the workpiece, and I want it to the workpiece and not to my table. And then I'm going to use one of the guides, or excuse me, one of the finger pulls itself to mark how deep I should go. So I'll just squeeze that in between the depth gauge and the stop, and that's how deep it'll go. So test my piece in here, and I can see I need to go a little bit wider. So I'm going to travel my template and my guide bearing down the template a little bit. And make another cut. Wait for that bit to stop. And that's perfect. Since I had quite a few of these to do, I decided to recycle a jig that I'd used in the past to center these. I decided that the depth of cut is ever so slightly too deep, so I'm going to move the depth gauge back by 8 thousandths or 0.2 millimeters. In order to do that, I'm going to use these two pieces from our hold down hardware kit and one of the collars for our guide bearings, and to use that as a stop, then put a feeler gauge in between, and I should be able to move that accurately. To set up for the doors, I'm using a single clamp and a stop that's clamped to the table, and we move the verticals so that they're closer together to accommodate for the smaller finger pulls. Since we're using the same bit, we don't need to change the depth of cut because we're referencing to the same front stop. Using a piece of leather underneath the clamp when I'm working on the front face. I was getting a little fuzz and actually a chip out. It's the only one I've had so far, but what I discovered was that instead of plunging full depth and making that cut all at once, if I plunge into the cut on those edges, that I can get a really nice clean cut. So this looks like a much nicer, cleaner cut. We're really happy with the way this turned out, and of course it's always fun to do projects with the PantoRouter. Happy PantoRouting!